Hi friends, welcome to PhiloEdu's. Today we will discuss about Plus 2 Chemistry chapter number 1, the solid state. Since we plan to conduct a detailed lecture series, we divide this chapter into 3 parts. Today we will discuss about the part 1 of this chapter, and it includes general characteristics of solid state, distinguish between amorphous and crystalline solids, classify crystalline solids on the basis of the nature of the binding forces, crystal lattice and unit cell close packing of particles. In addition to that, we also included the NCERT in-text questions in this series. In comparison with gases and liquids that we are normally dealing with in our daily life, solids are so versatile in their shape and their uses. These are some of the solids that we normally know. Then what is the reason behind this versatility? Yeah, that is due to the general characteristics of solid state. The first one is they have definite mass, volume and shape. Why it is so? It is due to the internuclear distances are very short in nature. And at the same time, the intermolecular forces are so strong. That means the particles in the solid material are closely packed. They are arranged in a continuous order. And their constituent particles have fixed positions and can only oscillate about their mean positions. If somebody asks you that the particle is moving in the solid, yes, they are moving, but their motion is not like that. It's not a translatory motion. It's just a vibration. The particles are vibrating in the solids based on their mean positions. And the solids are incompressible and rigid in shape. That is, they have definite volume and definite shape. After this introductory words, now we can move on to the core chapter, which starts with the classification of solids into crystalline and amorphous. What is a crystalline solid and what is an amorphous solid? Basically, this structure tells a lot about the properties and character of a crystalline and amorphous solid. And this picture, in the case of crystalline solid, it's clear that the arrangement is so perfect and it is always the same in the crystal. But in the case of amorphous solids, there are arrangements, but it is not continuous. And from this picture, it is clear that the particles, and it is considered as balls, and they are arranged in a perfect manner. But in the case of amorphous solids, the arrangement is not proper or there is no such order. Diamond, common salt are some examples of crystalline solids, and in the case of amorphous solids, glass, rubber are the examples. Then we can move more on to crystalline and amorphous solids. What are the basic characters and how we can classify them? What are the basic difference between crystalline and amorphous solids? In crystalline solids, there is a regular and definite arrangement of constant particle we can observe. But in the case of amorphous solid, no regular and definite arrangement of constant particle is there. In the case of crystalline solids, there is a long range order. That is, the particle arrangement is continuous throughout the solid. In the case of amorphous, it is not like that. There may have some order, but it should be a short range order. Some localized orders may be there. Sharp melting point is visible in the case of crystalline solids, but in amorphous solid, the melting process is taking place in such a way that gradually it softens over a range of temperature and then it melts. Not exactly it is converting into the proper liquid forms generally. It's nothing but a molten form. That's how it is happening in the case of amorphous solids. And normally it can be a range. Let it be 30-degree range. That is, at 1100 degrees Celsius, it starts melting. It starts something softening, and then at 1130 degree, it is the temperature remains constant and it is continuing melting like that. That means the range is not perfect. We can't say a particular temperature value for melting point in the case of amorphous solids. And in the case of crystalline solids, we have definite and characteristic heat of fusion. What do you mean by heat of fusion? It can be represented as delta HF. That is, the amount of heat energy required to increase the temperature of the substance by 1 degree Celsius. And that is definite and specific for crystalline solids. This is the characteristic property of a crystalline solid. But in the case of amorphous, they do not have definite heat of fusion. That's also in the form of a range. We can say that some range is there. And crystalline solids can be called as true solids. And amorphous solids, then it should be a pseudo solid or a supercooled liquid. This word is very important for this chapter. That is, they can be called as a supercooled liquid. Why it is so? We can deal with in text questions. In the crystalline solid, one thing is very important, that is they are anisotropic in nature. What do you mean by the word? This word is new for you and we will discuss about it. And at the same time, amorphous solid is isotropic in nature. Now we can inquire what is isotropy and anisotropy. Just consider this picture. Let it be the structure of a crystalline solid. Here two types of particles are there. One is the bricks and the next one is glass, broken glass. If a person looks like this and he comes from there and he looks straightly and he could see that there are only bricks, so he can walk easily through the big bricks and he can come out easily. But if another person is here to go to the next side, then in his path he is seeing that some glass is broken glasses are there, so he can't walk as same as that the previous person. His movement is restricted. This is a simple picture of crystalline solid. What is exactly it means? It is nothing but anisotropy. That is, in the crystalline solid, a long range order is there. The particles are well ordered and arranged in a proper manner. That is, along CD direction. If you are passing a light through that direction, the light will strike on the circles and the dots. Frequently, initially it strikes on a circle and then a dot, then a circle and a dot likewise. But in the case of AB direction, if you are passing a light through the crystal through AB direction, what will happen? The light only touches on the dots only. So the property will be different. Especially the physical properties like refractive index and electrical resistance is directional in the case of crystalline solids. That is, based on the direction changes. If the direction is changing, then the property also shows different values. It will not show a particular value. That is, for a crystalline solid, we can't say that the refractive index is this one. No, it is not possible. That is, based on the direction changes, the refractive index is also changing. So this property is known as anisotropy. The change in the property with respect to direction as anisotropy. But in the case of amorphous solid, there is no such order. So in large sense, in the bulk material, the refractive index will be same. Then we can move on to classification of crystalline solids. So we will stop the study of amorphous solids here and we can move more on, or we can concentrate more on crystalline solids. We can classify crystalline solids on the basis of their particles present in them into 4 categories. First one is ionic solids, metallic solids, covalent or network solids, and molecular solids. Molecular solids then divide into 3. First one is non-polar molecular solids, polar molecular solids, and hydrogen bonded molecular solids. First one is ionic solids. This is a pictorial representation of an ionic solid. From this picture itself, it is clear that they are made up of cations and anions, like our sodium chloride crystal. And the force between these particles are Coulombic force of attraction or electrostatic force of attraction. These type of solids are normally hard and brittle and shows high melting and boiling points. Normally they are insulators of heat and electricity in their solid state, but they conduct electricity in its molten or solution state. This is very important for a characteristic property of solid state, the conducting nature when it is melted. Then we can move on to metallic solids. Here, normally all metals are examples of metallic solids. The positively charged metal ion is immersed in a sea of electrons from the same atom. Normally we know that metals, in the case of metals, the valence electrons are loosely bounded to the nucleus. So it can easily eject from the atom, and it can constitute a pool of electrons, and thus positively charged metal ions are immersed in them. Here it is clear that there are free and mobile electrons, free and mobile electrons. So they can conduct electricity in its solid state itself. Normally the metals are malleable, ductile, and lustrous in nature. All the properties comes from the structure itself. Then what about covalent or network molecular solids? The picture represents a covalent or network molecular solid. Here, it is clear that all the valences of carbon is filled with other carbons. So, this is a single molecule. In a covalent or network molecular solid, the whole crystal is nothing but a single molecule. It behaves like that. So, we can call it as, or the basic particle of this type of solid is nothing but a giant molecule. They are very hard and brittle because their bonds are so strong. Normally the covalent bonds make them so strong. They are extremely high melting solids and they are insulators in normal conditions. Examples are diamond, silicon carbide, etc. Graphite is also a molecular solid, but it's a conducting molecular solid. We can discuss more about graphite and their structure and what is the reason for the conducting nature of graphite. And the next one is molecular solids. They are classified into three. The first one is non-polar molecular solids. We know that molecular solids are made up of molecules, individual molecules. In the case of non-polar molecular solids, they are made up of non-polar molecules like hydrogen, chlorine, iodine, helium, that type of individual molecules. So that means one hydrogen molecule is totally independent from the other molecule. So it is very difficult to make a solid of them. It is very difficult to do so. That means we need very low temperature for their solid existence. That's why their melting point is very low. The interaction between those particles are weak van der Waals force of interaction. So it is very easy to break them. It's simple. At room temperature, normally they are residing as gases. They are soft and non-conductors of heat and electricity. These are the characteristics of non-polar molecular solids. About polar molecular solids, they are molecular solids having polar molecules in them, like hydrogen chloride, sulfur dioxide, etc. Here, the molecules are existing as a dipole. So, like this. So, there exists a dipole-dipole interaction. It's a kind of electrostatic force of attraction. Not exactly that much strong as the attraction between two extremely polarized charged ions. They are polarized molecules, polar molecules. So the interaction is there, but it is weaker than normal ion-ion interactions. So these are called dipole-dipole interactions, and they are weak in nature but much stronger than in the case of non-polar molecular solids. So they have superior property as a solid in comparison with non-polar molecular solids. Soft and non-conductors of electricity. High melting and boiling points than non-polar molecular solids. These are the properties of them. Hydrogen bonded molecular solids, there exist hydrogen bonds. Example is water or hydrogen fluoride, ammonia, etc. In the case of ice, we know that water makes ice in its solid form, or we call the solid form as ice. There exists hydrogen bonding between two molecules of water. So that makes the interaction stronger. So that's why they have superior properties in comparison with non-polar molecular solids. The examples are water and hydrogen fluoride. They are also soft and non-conductors of heat and electricity. But in the case of water, if some acid additives or basic additives or any type of impurities can make it as a conductor, but not due to water molecules. Yeah, this is the structure of graphite. We know that graphite is a conducting molecular solid. Why graphite is conducting? Because of this structure. Here, in the graphite molecule, the molecule exists as sheets of carbon networks. That is, one carbon is bonded with three other carbons which are near to it. So one valency of carbon is free. We know that the valency of carbon is 4. Though the remaining carbon valency is interacting with the carbon valency of the top layer. That means the electron is free. That flexible electrons make this graphite conducting. Now we can deal with some questions. Why are solids rigid? What is the reason behind it? Solids are rigid due to the strong attraction between particles. This is the major point that should be included in your answer. Those are highlighted here. Strong attraction between particles, and the particles are closely packed. So they are rigid and having definite shape. Why do solids have a definite volume? The same answer is that strong attraction between particles and the interparticle distance remain unchanged at a given temperature. So it is not possible to compress them or reduce or increase the volume of solid easily. That's why the particles are so tightly packed. Classify the following as amorphous or crystalline solids: polyurethane, naphthalene, benzoic acid, Teflon, potassium nitrate, cellophane, polyvinyl chloride, fiberglass, copper, etc. It's simple. In the case of amorphous solids, we know that polymers are all normally amorphous solids. So you can easily pick the words, pick the names with which starts with polyurethane. Teflon is also a polymer. Cellophane, polyvinyl chloride, fiberglass. Glass is there. Glass, we know that glass is an amorphous solid. Then crystalline solids. Benzoic acid is a molecular crystalline solid. Naphthalene is also a molecular solid. Potassium nitrate is an ionic solid. Copper is a metallic solid. Why is glass considered as a supercooled liquid? This is very important. This question is very important. Glass stores properties of a liquid. That's why we call it as a supercooled liquid. What is the property of a liquid? It can flow. That is a major property. Yes, glass can flow, not in a small time interval. In the case of ancient glass structures, which are present in old churches, it is seen that in their window sheets, window glasses, the bottom part is much thicker than that of the top part. That's why, because the glass is flowing in the influence of gravity. The flowing nature is nothing but it's a property of a liquid. So we can call it as a supercooled liquid. Refractive index of a solid is observed to have the same value along all directions. Comment on the nature of this solid. Would it show cleavage property? Refractive index is same means it's an amorphous solid. Amorphous solids having irregular cleavage property. We know that in the case of crystalline solids, they have definite arrangement. So if you want to break, if you are applying a force on the crystalline solid, it will break in a proper way or in the form of a sheet. Why? Because that type of arrangement is there. But in the case of amorphous solid, the arrangement is not there. So if you break the glass, same type of glass, at the same point, if you apply forces, the two glasses will be broken in two different ways because there is no such order. That's why. Classify the following solids in different categories based on the nature of intermolecular forces operating in them. Potassium sulfate, tin, benzene, urea, ammonia, water, zinc sulfide, graphite, rubidium, argon, silicon carbide. We can classify them into molecular solid, ionic solid, metallic solid, and covalent solid categories. In molecular solid, we know that the solids like argon, benzene, urea, and ammonia are belongs to this category because argon is a non-polar molecule. So it belongs to non-polar molecular solid, that is molecular solid. Benzene is a molecular solid, urea is also a molecular solid, ammonia. And in the case of ionic salts like potassium sulfate, it's an ionic salt. Like zinc sulfide, that's also an ammonia. That's also a salt. Then other metals, normally simple metals like tin, rubidium, they are all belongs to the class of metallic solids. Then the remaining is covalent solids. We know that the examples of covalent solids are graphite, silicon carbide, diamond, etc. Next question. Solid A is a very hard electrical insulator in solid as well as in molten state and melts at extremely high temperature. What type of solid is it? We know that the solid A is very hard and electrical insulator. Okay, normally ionic solid is electrical insulator, molecular solid is also electrical insulator, and covalent and network solid is also electrical insulator in their solid form. And but in molten form also they are electrical insulators. In the case of ionic solid, in molten form they conduct. Molecular solid also there is a possibility to um, be non-conducting in its molten state, but molecular solids are not that much hard and they melt at extremely high temperature. So the solid would be covalent or network solid. Ionic solids conduct electricity in molten state but not in solid state. Explain. Ionic solids. In ionic solids, the particles are so close and they don't have the ability to move from one side to another. In the case of electrolytic conductance, normally the charge should pass from one side to another for conducting electricity. So in the case of solid form of ionic conductor, it is not possible. The movement of the particles are restricted due to the solid structure. When it is molten, it becomes a liquid. In the case of a liquid, it is possible to travel from one side to another with the charge. So based on a potential. So it is possible to conduct. What type of solids are electrical conductors, malleable and ductile? Electrical conductors, it's a hint, but malleable and ductile, that hints gives the exact picture of a metallic solid. The next major portion of this chapter is crystal lattice and unit cells. We already had a small discussion about the regular ordered arrangement of particles in a solid crystal. This is it. Consider this as an example. And here the big Blue balls are representing constituent particles of the solid. That can be ions, molecules, or atoms that you know. It is very difficult to identify the order of this particle by looking like this. So we can consider the center point of those particles as this type of dots. Then these are the dots which are representing the centers of all those balls. And if we draw lines which are connecting the centers of these dots, we'll get a regular three-dimensional arrangement and its shape. This regular three-dimensional arrangement of points is called crystal lattice, and each point represents the particle, and that points are called lattice points. Actually, lattice point is nothing but the center of each particle, constituent particle. This is the crystal lattice, and the golden points are. Now, this is the actual arrangement we know, and this is the crystal lattice. That is the three-dimensional arrangement. And you just consider a small portion of this that is represented in the green color. And we all know that each point is called lattice sites or lattice points, and each point in a crystal lattice represents one constituent particle. Lattice points are joined by straight lines to bring out the geometry of the lattice. And the small portion of this crystal lattice is called unit cell. So the unit cell is nothing but the actual smallest representation of the crystal lattice. It represents the total arrangement of the. So this is the unit cell or the smallest portion which has the individuality of the total lattice. Okay, this is the one. So unit cell is the smallest portion of the crystal lattice. And by repeating the unit cell in different directions, we can completely make the entire lattice from it. This is the unit cell, and this is the shape of the unit cell. It's just like a cube, or it's like a box. Consider the distance or the length of the box in the x direction as a, and the length of the box in y direction as b, and along z direction that is c. The angle between a and b is considered as alpha, between b and c is beta, between c and a is gamma. These are called cell parameters. These 6 terms are called cell parameters, and in which lengths as A, B and C, angles are alpha, beta and gamma. Now we can construct different type of unit cells based on the cell parameters. And the first one is cubic unit cell. Here all the angle is 90° and all the lengths are same. So it represents a perfect cube. The next one is tetragonal. Here all the angles are 90 and one side has more length than the other sides, that is C. The next one is orthorhombic, then monoclinic, triclinic, hexagonal and rhombohedral or trigonal. These type of 7 unit cells are made by varying the cell parameters, and they are called crystal systems. We can memorize these crystal systems by this small word. C term teacher. C represents cubic, T tetragonal, O orthorhombic, M monoclinic, T triclinic, H hexagonal, R rhombohedral or triangle. And it is also possible to classify the unit cell based on the cell constituent particles, number of constituent particles or where it is arranged. The first one is primitive. Here only at the corners of the unit cell particles are present. These are the corner particles. There are 8 corners. In 8 corners there are particles. The next one is body centered. In body centered unit cell, corner particles are already there, and in addition to that there is a particle at the center of the box. The next one is face centered unit cell. Here corner particles are present, which are represented by the white balls, and at the same time, each face center, you just consider this square. This is a face of that unit cell. For this face, at the face center, there is a particle. For the 6 faces, there are 6 particles. The next one is end-centered. Here also, and the additional particles in addition to that of the corner particles, 8 corners, there are particles. In addition to that, there are 2 particles at their face centers which are opposite to each other. Only 2 faces. They are called end-centered unit cell. Now we can go through the primitive unit cell in which corner particles are present. Then what is the contribution of a corner particle in a unit cell? That is very important for us. What is the contribution of a corner particle into a unit cell? This is the corner particle. Corner particle is shared with 8 unit cells. Each corner particle is shared with 8 unit cells. Consider this as a corner particle, and this is a part of the unit cell 1. That corner is sharing it. Next unit cell, the next one, and the fourth one. So half of the particle is shared by 4 unit cells, and the upper part is also shared by 4 other unit cells. So it is clear that a corner particle is shared with 8 unit cells. So the particle contribution of corner particle in a unit cell is 1 by 8. Then what about the particle in the face center? The face center particle is shared with 2 unit cells. It is easy. Consider this as a face center particle. So half of it is in a unit cell, and the remaining half is in the other unit cell. So the particle contribution is 1 by 2 for each unit cell. What about the body-centered unit cell? Body-centered particles in a unit cell. The particle is in the box. So it is clear that it is unambiguous that the particle belongs to that unit cell only. Then we can count the total number of particles for different type of unit cells. That is for primitive unit cell, 1 by 8 particle, that is the contribution of a corner particle. There are 8 corner particles, so the total contribution of the particle is 1. Corner particle is 1. There is no body center particle, face center particle, so the total number of particles is equal to 1. In body centered unit cell, there are corner particles, so 1 by 8 into 8, that's equal to 1. And there is a particle present in the body center. There is no face center particle, so the total number of particles is equal to 2. At the face centered particles, corner particles are there, so their contribution gives 1 by 8 into 8 is equal to 1. There is no body centered particle. But in face centers, there are 6 particles. 6 faces are there, 6 particles are there. Each particle contributes half into the unit cell. Therefore, 1 by 2 into 6, that's equal to 3. So the total number of particles in a face-centered unit cell is 4. In end-centered unit cell, corner particles gives 1. There is no body center particle. There are 2 face-centered particles, so their contribution is 1. So the total number of particles is equal to 2. This is very important. Now we know that unit cell can be divided into 2 categories. One is based on the cell parameters, and there are 7 types. And the next one is based on constituent particles present, and there are 4 types. So there can be 7 into 4, 28 type of arrangements. But the assumption is wrong. It is not possible. It is possible to have 14 type of lattices. That they are called Bravais lattices. That is, cubic unit cell cannot have all the type of primitive body-centered, face-centered and end-centered unit cell. It is not possible. There are different type of possibilities are there, and that number of the total number of possibilities are only 14. They are called Bravais lattices. This table will give you a clear picture about Bravais lattices, crystal systems, cell dimensions and angles. In cubic unit cell, three type of unit cells are possible. That is, three type of primitive, face-centered, body-centered type of unit cell can be having the symmetry or the structure of cubic crystal system. That is, A equal to B equal to C, alpha equal to beta equal to gamma equal to 90 degree. In tetragonal, primitive and body-centered type of unit cells are possible. In orthorhombic, all the four are possible. In the case of triclinic, hexagonal and rhombohedral, primitive only is possible. And these are the cell dimensions of it, and how you can memorize this cell dimensions. It's easy. First one is repeating in the seventh one. Second and sixth are the same, and in the center all the three are the same. And in this table or in this crystal systems, cubic crystal system is considered as the most symmetric one. That is, all the dimensions are same, all the angles are same. And triclinic is considered as the most unsymmetric one. And you also remember that orthorhombic unit cell has all the four type of Bravais lattices. You can count this type of Bravais lattices. In cubic there are three possibilities. In tetragonal there are two, orthorhombic 4, primitive monoclinic possibilities 2, and the remaining 3 has 1. The total is 3 plus 2 plus 4 plus 2 and plus 3 from the remaining 3. That is equal to 14. That represents the total Bravais lattices. The next part is cross packing. We know that in crystals, the constituent particles are well orderly arranged. We want to study the peculiarity and nature of those arrangements. For the convenience, for the easiness of our study, we can start with one-dimensional cross packing. And then we will go for the two-dimensional cross packing. And finally, we can understand how it can be applied for the three-dimensional cross packing. Actually, in the crystal system, only three-dimensional cross packing is possible, and it is there. And we can study about three-dimensional through 1D, 2D cross packing structures. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, please like it, share it, and please subscribe it and switch on the bell button. Thank you so much.